all that good stuff after the live show. Oh, it's waiting for you to agree. Yeah, okay. I never noticed that before. Some legal warning or something. They're always adding something new, trying to protect themselves, aren't they?
Well, trying to protect us.
Yeah, I suppose I kind of. Yeah.
They're watching over us, Michael.
That's the watchers. Well, who watches those watchers? All right, we'll save it for the show here. Let me click on this little button here. All right, welcome back to the show. My guest today is the president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and he is also running for, well, he's vying for the presidential spot for the Libertarian ticket. And he is somebody that I personally have followed for years, and it's really great. I'm really happy to be able to bring you Jacob Hornberger. Jacob Hornberger, welcome to the show. Thank you so much.
Oh, the thanks are mine. Thanks for having me on, Michael. And let me just point out one thing. Yeah, I serve as president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, but I need to emphasize that they don't endorse my candidacy because they're a nonprofit foundation. But people can get a good sense of the work I've done for liberty by going to fff.org. So I wanted to just clear that up.
No, that's great. That's a good point because of the fact that you state that pretty clearly on the website. I noticed that just on the Future of Freedom Foundation website just the other day as I was going through and catching up on my research and making sure everything. And they make that real clear that if they say somebody, they don't mention you by name. How many times have you run for president?
This will be the second time. I threw my hat in the ring in 2000 just at the national convention. I didn't wage much of a campaign, but ran there at the convention and got soundly defeated.
Soundly defeated. You got to love a man who knows his place. That's great. And so you're pushing forward again this time around. You're going to see if the Libertarian, and you have to go to convention and do all the stuff. You got to do all that. What do you think? How are you looking this time around?
Well, I think good. I mean, we've got a nice structure. I started out starting all by myself and started from scratch, but I had some really strong supporters, people like Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Dave Smith, and the Mises Caucus people in the Libertarian Party. And then I started attracting volunteers. I got the greatest campaign manager, I think, in the Libertarian Party, a guy named Jake Porter from the Iowa Libertarian Party. And then I got a social media team. So we put together a nice structure. I've been to, 4 or 5 conventions since I announced. I think it's 5 in South Carolina. And before that, I went to about, 7, 8, or 9 in 2019 just to kind of visit and give some talks on adhering to principle. So far, I mean, it's been an energizing experience. What's exciting is that every one of the conventions I've been to since I announced, they've got more people running for delegates than they have delegate slots. And I think that's a heck of a good sign for the party. I mean, it shows there's some excitement in this party, and that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I've participated in that particular part of the process before as well as a delegate. And I saw a great turnout. It was for Dr. Paul in 2012. And I was so amazed. And I made the beauty of it is that whatever came out of it, obviously he didn't go on to the presidency. But I made great friendships. I met those people there, and I still know those people to this day. Though they didn't go away, they didn't leave my life. So that was really great.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Ron Paul because he's one of my real life heroes. And in his 2008 race, I actually went up to New Hampshire and went door to door, giving out pamphlets for Ron Paul, and he's just so inspiring, and he inspired me, and it was a big honor. I've written a book on sort of a libertarian autobiography of how I discovered libertarianism, and it's called My Passion for Liberty. And it was just a big honor. I asked Dr. Paul if he'd write the introduction, and he did. And so that book's available on Amazon, and it gives my little life history of how I discovered libertarianism and the core tenets of libertarianism. So it's a nice little introduction to libertarian thought, and it's called My Passion for Liberty.
if you go to towardanarchy.com, if you're listening, if you have to dig through the archive, just click the archive button and you can always follow along. We encourage that you follow along. Looking for February 9th there, and there's a link to the Future of Freedom Foundation website. There's also links from right there to the books that you're talking about, as well as the campaign website. That link is there as well. And I'll be sharing that all throughout the show. Make sure that you go and check it out. Because I personally, well, here's something that I thought was really neat, and I get to think about this because I'm one of these tech guys. You have fff.org, and that says something about how long you've been doing this longer than websites have been around, at least as we understand them. But to have fff.org means that you were on your game early on, and we people like myself found you early on out there. That's a really amazing feat, and to still be at it all these years. Is it 31 years this year?
It's about 30. Yeah, maybe 30 when we started in 89, but I'm laughing about your point because what actually happened, I wish it were that good, but it's actually not so great a story about that. This guy calls me up and he says, hey, they're coming out with something called URLs or something where you're going to want to reserve your website. And he says, I can do a basic one for you. And he says, do you think you'd want fff.com or fff.org? And I said, man, I have no idea what you're talking about. You pick it. I don't care. And that's how we ended up with fff.org.
Well, just the fact that you have a 3-character, I mean, they're impossible to get. They've been sold out for years, and it's a top domain, top level. It's just geek stuff. It's just really great. It's a testament to what you've been doing all these years, and that you've been paying attention. You weren't even. It wasn't even a case of you. It took you time. Somebody come to you and said, "This is going on. This is the next thing." You jumped onto it, and you've been spreading the message for a lot of years on the internet. So I applaud you for that. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you and have the conversation with you. I thought it would be kind of fun. I've been doing this for a number of months now, working this thing out and trying to see where it goes. And it's ultimately ended up in a word association game that I play with my guests. And so it's just kind of fun to get the mind firing and get you thinking about some of these things. And so I just have one word questions for you, and we'll just do word association. You just fly. Let me know what you think of these. And I'm going to save the one I normally ask first for last because it's germane to our conversation. So it may bring up more conversation, but I'll start with an easy one. Free market.
Freedom.
It is, right? It's a freedom of choice. It's freedom to do whatever you want, whatever's available out there, right?
That's right. I mean, if you want to talk a little bit about these terms that people, they use free market to describe American life, and it's really the exact opposite, the kind of system. We're just all indoctrinated with the idea that this way of life, which we libertarians call a welfare warfare state way of life, highly regulated way of life, is just free enterprise, free market. Well, the real meaning of the term free market is markets that are free entirely from government intervention, government control, government regulation. That was what was so revolutionary about the concept when Adam Smith first brought it up. So when you look at the situation we live under today, we would separate the economy. President Trump goes and brags that he's a great central planner, that he's managed the economy, that he's responsible for this economic boom. I mean, but notice his mindset that he's a central planner. That's a socialist concept. A libertarian concept or free market concept is there are no central planners. There is a total separation of economy and the state, and everybody is free to manage his own economic activities.
That's perfectly put, and it's a long conversation that we're having to battle from both sides of this, because you're talking about Mr. Trump, and you're talking about the fact that he just did the State of the Union address, and he used those exact words, and then he followed them up by using the words something to the effect of, "We won't let this nation fall into socialism. We won't let socialism take over." And it's, do you not understand the word socialism? Clearly, he doesn't. Okay, that's great. All right.
Let me just make a point about that, because your point is very well taken. I hate to let it just go by.
No.
While he says this, he's over there decrying Bernie Sanders and the socialists and the Democratic Party, and rightfully so. I mean, they want to do this gigantic socialist healthcare plan after their their big socialist healthcare plan of Medicare and Medicaid has been such a fiasco. Their logic is more socialism to fix the crisis from little socialism. But Trump decries all this, and then he supports Social Security and Medicare, and he says, I will make sure that we never get these programs abolished. It doesn't occur to him that these are the major socialist programs in America, along with the big military industrial complex, the public school system, the Federal Reserve System, the immigration control system. He doesn't get that. And neither do most Republicans. Republicans, they convince themselves, oh, we're advocates of free enterprise, we're capitalists. When here they support every single socialist program that comes down the pike, with the possible exception of food stamps.
Yeah, and you get this argument that, oh, well, capitalism allows that. I was having this conversation with somebody today, and they keep claiming that, and my argument is that clearly you don't know the word capitalism. You don't understand what it means, because if you just go with the word itself, capital, the root word of it is head. So it's literally the practice of being the head decision maker of your own personal economy. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Now, if you take capitalism and the money of it and the things that it develops, and you allow those people to buy a government, that's socialism. If they start stealing from the people and they say, and start redistributing the wealth, that's got nothing to do with the fact that there's capitalism there. And it's really popular right now because the Republicans are in power, and they do claim to be capitalists when they're not. They're socialists.
Right. And then you've got the people on the left, the Democrats, that are castigating the kind of system we live under as being a capitalist system. And so what they're really doing, as we libertarians understand, is they're complaining about their own system, because we don't like the current system either. But we understand that it's a socialist system. It's a gigantic welfare state, gigantic warfare state, gigantic regulated and planned economy. And we don't favor that. Well, neither does the left. The difference is that they think it's a capitalist system, and so they say, well, capitalism has failed, so we need socialism. We libertarians know that it's a socialist system, and we say, let's have a genuine free market system.
Yeah, and then you get bogged down in arguing about the words and what they mean and never get around to the real conversation so often. At least that's what I find so often, particularly now with the social media and the quick comment and everything. There's a lack of intelligence and thought that tends to go with particularly the initial feedback you get on ideas in the social media, and it's tough to deal with sometimes. Here, let's do another one. This one brings up arguments on both sides, as always, and that's the whole point of it. How about borders?
Open borders.
Open borders. And with the clarification that my next word would be property.
Private property.
Okay. So we're definitely on the same page. It's a no-brainer on some of these things, but it's funny because I ask some people that say they know, that say they support these things, and you catch them sometimes. Let's see. I got a couple more written down here. What about money?
Free market.
It goes right hand in hand with it. It's a tool. Right?
Yeah, what we really need is a free market monetary system. That we have, again, a socialist system. And the reason that I say that is because the Federal Reserve is involved in monetary central planning. They decide how much money is going to be in circulation. They manipulate the interest rates. This is central planning in its classic form. Well, so there's different variations of socialism. There's the taking the money from one group of people through force and giving it to another group of people. There's where the government owns enterprises or owns everything, like Amtrak or something like that. That's a socialist thing. In Cuba, the state owns everything, or North Korea. But you also have central planning. And in the monetary field, that's what the Fed does. And so look what the Fed's done over more than 100 years. They destroyed the official money of the United States, which was gold coins and silver coins. That was our official money. They destroyed that. They produce these booms and busts. They inflate these bubbles, and then they burst. And this is where Trump comes in. You see, Trump's over there saying, oh, I look how well I've managed the economy. And it's really this bubble that's been inflating since 2008. Since the crash in 2008, they've had this quantitative easing, which is just a fancy term for debasing the monetary stock, inflating the monetary stock. And when the bubble bursts, which it's going to, because it always does, I guarantee you Donald Trump's not going to say, well, it turned out I was a bad manager after all. At that point, he's going to say, oh, it's all the Federal Reserve's fault. So he's got the best of all worlds. When the Fed's inflating the bubble, he takes all the credit. When the bubble bursts, he shifts the blame to everybody else. But I favor, Michael, a free market monetary system. Abolish the Fed, or as Ron Paul used to say, end the Fed. Get rid of compulsory legal tender laws, and then let the market decide what medium of exchange people want to use. That could be gold, that could be silver, that could be Bitcoins, American Express bank checks. Whatever the market comes out with, the market produces the best of everything. And that's what I favor. And in fact, that was a system that Friedrich Hayek, the Nobel Prize-winning libertarian economist, favored. He wrote an essay called The Denationalization of Money, where he advocated the separation of money and the state.
It's a very long conversation, and it's good that you bring it up, because next week I have a guest on, Michael Howell, an author who's going to talk specifically about ending the Fed. So I will have that conversation again next week. There's so much there, but yeah, it's really one of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome as far as socialism, because people have been trained to believe that they have to run their economy using the money put out by the Federal Reserve, and then they don't understand what happens to that money. They don't understand that it's dishonest, that it's not managed properly, and that there's reasons for it, natural reasons for it, that it can't really be done the way that they've done it. It's really a fraud.
Yeah, that's a great point you make, because I think part of the problem is that when you grow up, when you're born and raised under a certain kind of system, you don't tend to question it. And especially when you're indoctrinated with the notion from the first grade on up with the Pledge of Allegiance and stuff, that you live in a free country, then all of the apparatuses around you that you grow up with, you think are freedom. And I think that's the problem with the Fed, that when it first was adopted in 1913, everybody knew it was an alien type thing, because the official money of America had been gold coins and silver coins, and all of a sudden there was no central bank. And suddenly they bring this thing into existence. They start inflating debt instruments through the 1920s, which were still redeemable in gold. And then they realized that they were overinflating. People were starting to demand their gold. There was going to be runs on the banks. So they overcontract, and that's what causes the stock market crash in 1929. And this has been documented by Milton Friedman, by the Austrians, Murray Rothbard. But what do? They blame it on free enterprise, because by that time everybody thought, oh, well, the Fed's just part of America's free enterprise system, and so I guess the free enterprise system has failed. Well, it didn't fail. It was this socialist system called the Federal Reserve that failed, and ultimately ended up destroying what had been the finest monetary system in history. I mean, the soundness of money for more than 100 years was incredible. It was one of the major causes in the tremendous rise in the standard of living in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They ended up destroying all that without even a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, right. If just an act of Congress that did it, and it would take an act of Congress to end it. There was one of those myths that we just went through, 20 years ago already. Oh boy, has it been that long? No, just 7 years ago, right? That the Federal Reserve would end in 100 years, that the charter ended, and that wasn't true. We're still waiting for it to end, and we're fighting for it to end. A lot of people out there are still carrying that banner, that End the Fed banner. I still have an End the Fed T-shirt. I haven't worn it in a while. It's white. It's old. It's been worn many, many times.
Well, it was one. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, it was one of the great achievements of Ron Paul. I mean, who would have ever thought that this geeky little mantra of "End the Fed" would be smart political strategy? And yet it spread like wildfire. I remember seeing an Occupy movement protest in California, and a lot of them were carrying "End the Fed" signs. This is the far left. And I thought, Ron Paul, you're a genius.
Yeah. That was me, except I was in Denver. We were leading. This is early on, before the so-called anarchists came in. The black bloc, the controlled left, came in and disturbed everything. I was down there on the street for the whole thing. Early in the Occupy movement, we had people marching on the Federal Reserve. We had 2,000 people in the streets, men, women, and children marching on the Federal Reserve. We had it going in the right direction. election before it was infiltrated. Yeah, yeah.
That's
And
freaking awesome.
it was great, and that's what I had. My sign said "End the Fed," and sometimes I had a George Bush mask, and sometimes I wore a 9/11 T-shirt, but I always had the "End the Fed" sign. So yeah, yeah. Well,
That's awesome.
we're going to slip off into a break here real quick. Go to towardanarchy.com if you're trying to follow along, as we always encourage you to do. I have the Future of Freedom Foundation website link is up there. Jacob Hornberger's campaign website is up there as well. You can check out what he's got going on to offer as far as president, and we'll talk about voting because that's going to be one of the questions that I ask him here in just a moment. And everything else, towardanarchy.com. We'll be right back. All right, let's see. We'll stop this guy and talk to these interesting people like yourself. So it's been really, really cool. Thank you for doing it.
I really enjoy this.
I bet you're getting to meet some interesting characters. Are you going to do anything where you open up? This is something, and maybe you might not because I think John might regret it. Right after I contacted him and made the arrangements to do the interview, he sent out on Twitter that he was willing to talk to smaller podcasts and things like that. If you could say that you had 100 people listening to your podcast, he was willing to come chat with you. And he just got inundated with requests. So I was so glad that I was like the first one to hit him up.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's a whole new cottage industry, isn't it?
It's amazing what's going on out there and what people are doing. You probably don't have the time to indulge in it like I do. I have the time to be able to indulge in this stuff, and the event. There's 800,000 podcasts out there.
Wow!
Yeah.
Wow!
Yeah, and that's just the ones that are sort of counted by like the Spotify's and iTunes and things like that. Yeah, it's amazing. It's just unbelievable. All right, well, let's jump into the second half of this thing. And I got to reset my timer there. I try to keep it legitimate just for the network because they have to accommodate me when I do it like this and move the commercials around because I don't give them chances for breaks.
Where's your radio show?
It's Republic Broadcasting Network.
Okay.
They're out of Austin, Texas. It is 100% listener supported. It's 24/7 live broadcasting. Wow. And it's all over the world, all over satellite, micro FMs, and they're just amazing. They've been at it for a long time, a decade or more, right in that area. Yeah,
that's awesome that you've got that going. Good for you.
Man, they came and knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I did a show with them years ago, and it was a group thing. It was at the time that Occupy was going on. In fact, that was one of the things that I was talking about, all that was going on. And then years later, they just out of the blue, they come back and they said, "Hey, you wanna host a show? We got some time." And I'm like, oh my God, I've been dying to find something like this. Yes, I've had this idea, this Toward Anarchy thing, this libertarian idea that it should connect with all the people on the right and all the libertarians and all the anarchists, and I can do this. I can solve it once and for all. But no.
That's fantastic. Wow. What you lack is a little bit of passion for what you do.
Yeah, right. It shows. It shows. You too. That passion. Bring it up a notch.
Right.
Let's put on a show here for these people.
Okay, that's good.
All right. Okay, welcome back to the show, and my guest is Jacob Hornberger. I'm telling you what, you're definitely going to want to make sure you watch the YouTube video of this because we did catch a couple of minutes in there where we were just chatting, and so there's going to be some extras to enjoy on this one. TowardAnarchy.com. The links are there. The website is there. We were doing a little bit of word association, this thing that's developed on the show, and it's fun. It's just it's a great way to get people thinking, and I got a couple of controversial ones, particularly when it comes to the anarchists. And so how about police?
Essential.
Okay. Explain to me in the terms, because I know that when you say that police are essential, that you mean it so much differently than revenue generation and catching speeders and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm not an anarchist. I'm an advocate of limited government,
right?
Limited government republic. But I should point out that some of my best friends are anarchists. And one of my anarchist friends tells me that I'm his favorite minarchist because I come so close to being an anarchist. So I've written a 6-part series, I think, at the Future of Freedom Foundation saying why I favor limited government that analyzes the whole debate, which, as you know, Michael's been going on for decades. So I believe that government has 3 important functions or critical functions. One is to protect the nation in the event of an invasion, to have a basic military force that is enough to galvanize the public, take volunteers from people that are ready to fight to defend the country. But I'm talking about a real invasion, not all this foreign interventionism stuff. And so I think that's important. Number 2, I believe that the government should provide a judiciary where people can go in and resolve their disputes by suing each other. That way they can resolve their disputes in court without going out and having to kill each other. And as long as there's a sense of justice and fairness, what I find phenomenal about the judicial system is that the loser never kills the winner. That as long as they feel like they've got a fair shot in court, people seem to comply with these judgments. And then the third one is the one you're bringing up, and that's to target people that are murderers, rapists, thieves, people who initiate force or fraud against other people. And that's where the police come in. I think the reason the police have such a bad image today is because they're charged with doing so many bad things. Like the war on drugs is a big example. If you get cops out of the drug enforcement business, you would start to return the word justice to the criminal justice system. The drug war just corrupted the police. It's corrupted the judicial system. So if you take all that apparatus out, all the vice stuff, the prostitution, the mutually consensual things, get them out of the criminal justice system and limit the police to going after the violent people or the fraudulent people. Then I think people then would have this image that the police are our friends. If there's a burglar breaking into your house, you want those cops to come over there immediately. And along with your right to self-defense, of course. But that's where I see the function of government.
No, and that's why I asked you to clarify, because I understood that was your position. And while I am an anarchist, I have no problem understanding the minarchist idea. I get the founding fathers' idea and their vision, and I understand it, and I understand how it's gone wrong, and I understand that it can be fixed, and that there is, theoretically, we have to say at this point, a way to have a voluntary government, a way to offer those services that you suggested. Whereas right now they're monopolized and controlled and socialized, which distracts both the funds and the intelligence and the attention away from the real activities that they're supposed to offer us, defending us instead of going out and policing the world. In the case of representing us in court, and not being adversarial, but being that arbiter of arguments between real people, and then of course with the police, them being there on call to come and protect you and offer their services, as opposed to prey on you as victims, pirates playing on victims.
Right. I mean, one of the critiques I often get is that, well, if the Constitution was such a great thing, it's failed. I mean, government naturally gets bigger and bigger, and so it's impossible to have limited government. Well, I think people miss the point here, though, that when the framers called the Constitution into existence and the American people approved the federal government, it was done with this assumption that its powers would be extremely limited. Americans were very leery of this thing. They'd been operating under the Articles of Confederation, where the federal government didn't even have the power to tax. Imagine, 13 years they operate with no power to tax. And so they were very leery because they understood that governments turned tyrannical. But the argument was made, well, no, here are their powers, they're limited. And to make sure, we're going to have the Bill of Rights that expressly prohibits them from doing this and this and this and this. Well, that system actually worked extremely well. Now, I'm not saying there weren't bad aspects of American society. We know there were. There was slavery. There was women's rights problems. There was tariffs. land grants to the railroads, the crony capitalism, government-business partnerships. But there were sound principles, too, in our founding. Imagine, for more than 100 years, no federal income tax, no IRS, no Social Security, no welfare, no Medicare, Medicaid, no CIA, no NSA, no Pentagon, no giant military establishment, no drug laws, no foreign interventionism. This is a remarkable achievement, and it shows you a baseline that we're able to achieve, because sometimes I'm told, oh, your system's utopia. Well, how can it be utopia when it's been achieved? But you see, it's like a seawall. A seawall is designed to protect a community from high tides, but its purpose is not to protect the community from a tsunami. When a tsunami comes in, you can't say the seawall has failed, because that's not its purpose. Well, it's the same with the Constitution. The Constitution protects you against high tides of assaults on liberty, like the Civil War, where Lincoln behaved tyrannically and things like that. But then things receded back. We get back to gold and silver, even though he was having paper money. But in the 1930s, you get this tsunami that had been building up of socialism, of interventionism, militarism, imperialism, and it became so large that the entire system just got overwhelmed with Roosevelt's New Deal, and then the national security state apparatus that comes into existence after World War II, the two world wars. There was no way that any document was going to stop this tsunami. So I think what I do is I look to the Constitution as a guide, but it's not my shibboleth. The moral principles of liberty are my shibboleth. This is what we need to do to achieve a free society.
That's perfectly put, that it's your moral principles that guide it, and not some archaic notion of a piece of paper that supposedly is going to protect you. Because it's funny, because that's the way people look at it. It's like, oh, well, it says you can't do it in the Constitution. Well, they're not going to do it then, right? Well, they've proven over and over again since really, we'll call it that 100-year mark after, that it was gone. It was completely bypassed. Well, okay, my argument is that by the time we get past the first 10 amendments, and we can question whether those were well written or properly presented or protected as they were, but by the time you get to the 11th, it immediately changes tone. Government by then has already completely changed. It's no longer for the people. It becomes for citizens. It becomes for elite or protected groups, and they start naming them off, voters and things like that. They start adding these little amendments and things like that as we get further along. So it's been a long, long time that things have been building up to where we get to the point that it is today. Well,
that's right. And I love the first 10 amendments. I mean, they really do reflect the mindset of the American people at that time. And they say, Congress shall pass no law abridging freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press. Well, why would you do that? I mean, these are elected representatives. Why are you telling Congress you can't do this? Why didn't they just trust Congress? Well, it really shows their mindset is that these elected representatives that we're putting into power, if we don't put this amendment there, they're going to destroy us. They're going to destroy our liberty, these elected people. And then you've got gun rights in the Second Amendment, which I think should have been first, because without the gun rights, the First Amendment really doesn't matter at all. But they wanted to make sure, because they knew that government officials have this propensity to destroy liberty, sometimes with the best of intentions. Oh, the national emergency or something like that. And then my favorite, well, I guess some of my favorite are 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th, which say if you target somebody, you have to go through this barbed wire entanglement, trial by jury, right to counsel, right to confront witnesses, no torture or cruel and unusual punishments. This was a remarkable achievement. I mean, people forget that these are the things that have gone on throughout history by governments. I mean, government wants somebody, they'll just go seize them, and they use the military. That was the other thing, is that our founding fathers, our ancestors understood the danger of a standing military establishment. You can Google on our page at Future of Freedom Foundation, standing armies, and you'll see a page, all the quotes where they just said, this is the worst thing you can have, is an enormous military intelligence establishment, which is what we have today, a national security state. because it's so dangerous to liberty, that this is what destroys people's freedom. And so, yeah, I mean, I love the amendments. I think the first 10 they're fantastic.
Yeah, that's great, and it's such a simple concept, but and I wish that I could articulate it a little bit better to be able to tell it to other people, is to be able to get into their head that they need to accept some things at face value, and that they need to not always throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's how I always see it when people talk about the Constitution and when they talk about the documents. Yeah, I get it when you're saying that they're just pieces of paper. But what was it? Which one of them was it that said it to the lady that asked him on the way out the door? What did we have, Mr. Jefferson? Was it that it? You have a democracy if you can keep it. Is that right? Am I?
It was a republic.
A republic, a
Yeah.
democracy. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Oh.
Yeah, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. And it's a great point, because your document can be perfectly expressed, perfectly written, but at the end of this thing, if people lose the thirst for liberty and the passion for liberty, no document's going to protect them. That government's propensity is to take power. And the countervailing force is the will of the people to keep their freedom. And what happened in the 1930s with the emergency and the crisis of the Great Depression, people got scared. And this is why crises are always so dangerous, because this is when people are willing to surrender their liberty. And notice there's no emergency exception in the Constitution. You can look in the Bill of Rights, and it doesn't say except in times of emergency, because they understood this is the most threatening time. So that's what's happened, is that people have lost this sense of what does it mean to be free, and this passion for liberty. That's why I would like to be the nominee of this party, is that I think that if we could invigorate that love of liberty, properly understood, raise people's vision to a higher level. One of my aims, if I were accorded the honor of this nomination, would be to have Americans discussing and debating two questions. What does it really mean to be free? And what is the role of government in a free society? Because I figure if everybody's discussing those two questions, they're thinking at a higher level. And that's when they start saying, well, why do we need this part of government? Why do we need that part of government? Instead of saying, oh, well, let's just reduce the size of government, which, I'm not interested in a smaller DEA. I want to get rid of the DEA. And so that's why I think we have a heck of a good shot, because I think there's a lot of people, Michael, that are figuring out there's something wrong in this society. They see the economy booming. They listen to what Trump's saying. The stock market's booming. But they get a sense that something's not right. You got suicide rates soaring among young people. I mean, what's that all about? Why are young people checking out of life early? And then you've got massive drug addiction, alcoholism, random killings for irrational reasons. This is a very dysfunctional society, and what we need to be doing is analyzing what is the root cause of that dysfunctionality.
Well, I think that it is something that has seeped into our society, and that it is completely. I like to challenge people to give me a problem in society, and I'll tell you how government has made it worse.
That's right. That's excellent. And actually not only made it worse, but made the problem in the first place.
In the first place, a lot of times.
Yeah,
so many times. Yeah.
Yeah. You look at healthcare, immigration, out of control spending, the dollar, foreign policy. Government's the root cause of all that.
Yeah, and they do so in light of. This is why it's so nefarious, and this is why people get disheartened, and this is why we end up where we are right now. Because they have to know it. It's not like somebody hasn't been talking about these things for a long time. It's not like it hasn't been laid out before everyone that there's really no middle ground on liberty. You're either free or you're a slave. You're either tied to someone else and beholden to them in one way or another, or they're tied to you, or you're not.
It is great to hear you say that. I mean, it's like music to my ears, because, there's a divide in this movement and in this party, and there's people that just have settled for reforming the welfare warfare state. So they come up with these reform plans. They're oftentimes very convoluted, like Social Security privatization and phasing out Social Security over 30 years, or health savings account that leave Medicare intact, or surveillance reform or CIA reform. Okay, all that may improve the lives of us serfs. That's possible. It oftentimes makes the situation worse, as you said, but it's not freedom. In order to achieve freedom, you've got to dismantle the abridgments on freedom, which means you've got to identify what are those abridgments, and then you've got to work to dismantling them, which means as a presidential candidate, going out among Americans and making the case for a free society. If all that we libertarians succeed in doing is reforming this way of life, we've achieved nothing with respect to freedom, any more than reforming slavery. Imagine if there were libertarians saying, well, slavery is here to stay. It's in the Constitution. Let's make peace with it. Let's get laws providing for fewer lashings, shorter work hours, and better food and health care. Okay, fine, the slaves would have been appreciative, but they would have known it wasn't freedom. To achieve freedom, you got to dismantle slavery. And to achieve freedom in our time, you've got to dismantle, not reform, serfdom.
Absolutely well put. That's amazing. That's great. I wish we weren't already running out of time, unfortunately, but that is it. As a economically right-minded individual, I realize the time is an extremely valuable commodity. So I appreciate you taking the time to stop by and say hi and share with you. It's been a real personal pleasure of mine to get a chance to talk to you, and I wish you the best of luck on the election. I don't know if I'll go out and vote or not, but hey, if you make the ballot, I'm that much closer to voting for you than I would be, because the reality is that you speak a language of reason, and that's very, very important to me, because if we have a framework, a groundwork for reason, then we can solve every problem.
I agree, but I want you to know something.
Yeah.
That if I become the nominee and I lose this race by one vote, I know where you are.
All right. Fair enough. I accept that responsibility.
It's been a real pleasure, Michael. Thank you for having me
much
on there. Real honor. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Okay.
All right. Appreciate that so much. That was really great.
That was a blast. Absolute blast, man. Awesome.
I would love to do it again sometime, so I will stay in touch, and I wish you the best of luck, and if I can get up that day to the polls, I mean, if you're out there, man, there's no reason why I wouldn't. I'm one of those people. The voting thing's not a violation of the NAP. It doesn't work that way. That's not how it works.
I agree. I didn't vote for 20 years or so, but I finally realized. I said, if you really want to change things, if you don't vote, then they win by default. Because if you let's say you had 70% of libertarians ready to shift, to dismantle all this crap, and 30% that don't. Well, if the 70% don't vote and just sit back at home, the 30% end up in control. Yeah. When that finally hit me, I said, no, this is the only way. It's a long, hard battle, but it's the only way. Hey, so tell me, how do I learn the link and everything so that I can post it on my website?
Oh, absolutely. What I'll do, I'll just email you everything as soon as it's all together. It'll all be there in an email.
Perfect. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.
Take care.